Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this morning's webinar. So this presentation will last about 20 minutes with time for questions at the end. If you can remain muted during the session for me, please, and then put any questions that you have in the chat on the meeting itself. I'll answer any questions at the end, and any questions that we didn't get a chance to answer, we'll make sure those are added onto the frequently asked questions section on the webinar webpage. So today we're going to be looking at users and groups in the service delivery console. So we're going to look at where to access the service delivery console. We'll look at accessing the user list within the service delivery console so that you can see all the users that you have added onto the system. We'll edit those users and we'll look at adding new users as well. We'll also look at the groups list within the service delivery console, and again look at editing and adding those groups. Finally, we'll also look at where you can customize both the users and the groups in the configuration console to change any of the default settings there. So to access the service delivery console, if you've already logged into the user console, you can use the menu at the top right hand side of the user console. So that's the three lines just next to your initials. When you click on the menu there, you'll get shortcuts to the other consoles that you have access to, and you can then select the service delivery console from the menu next to your initials. Alternatively, from the single sign-on screen when you first log in, you can go straight to the service delivery console by selecting the box on the screen there. Once you're in the service delivery console, at the top of the screen, you'll have 5 menus. So we have users, extensions, groups, calendars, and numbers. And if you work from users over to numbers, you can actually set up the service for your own practice there from the beginning. You can either click on the menus at the top of the screen there, just next to your initials, or further down the screen, when you first log in, you'll get some boxes on the screen with manage buttons there. You can either click on the manage button lower down on the screen or use the menus at the top to access the user list there. So I'm going to click on the users. Now, the first time you access users, it will then show you on the system a brief overview and give you some information on how you can use this particular section of the service delivery console. Once you've been into these menus, you won't then see that information. So you'll only see this diagram the first time that you log in. If you scroll down to the bottom of the screen, there is actually a template here where you can upload all the users for the practice. So if you're setting the practice up for the first time, then you can download the template directly from the screen, complete the template with the user details, and then upload that onto the system to upload all the users. That may be something that the service delivery team have helped you with though. But the first time you access this screen, you will need to click the Manage Users button down at the bottom of the screen in order to access the list of users that you currently have on the system. So once I've clicked on the Manage button, that will then bring me into a table that shows me all the users that we have on our particular practice. So within the table, you've got the user's name, you've got their email address. Now that's normally their NHS email address, and that becomes their username on Surgery Connect when they're logging in. It will also have their short dial number. So remember that with Surgery Connect, the extension numbers go with users rather than the phones on the desks. So the system would know that dialing 216 within the practice would always find Adam, no matter where Adam's logged in, and whichever device Adam is using to make and receive his calls. So with the short dials with the actual users, it means you can use the system remotely without needing to know any of the numbers for that particular person. Also in the table here, we've got the permission level. So we've either got supervisors or standard users with group management. You will notice that there is a new permission level now as well for clinicians. The clinicians permission level will give all the clinicians, or give their clinician with clinician permissions access to all call recordings for the practice, but without giving them access to the service delivery console and the full supervisor access. We also have a column marked as logged in. Now that doesn't mean that the user is currently logged in, but it means that they have logged in since they've received their initial email with their user details and that they've now set a password for Surgery Connect on the system. We also have a column here called EMIS username, so this practice has EMIS as their clinical database. Once people have used the integration and have linked up their Surgery Connect user ID to their EMIS login, their EMIS name or their clinical database login name will show in the last column here. Up at the top, we have buttons here where you can add new users. You can import your users if you've used the template using the Import Users button here. And that will then use the template to upload all the user details into the table for you. In the options column, we've got 3 different icons here. So you've got a blue pen to edit anything that's already in the table so that I can change any details here. You have a teal envelope, which is how you can send out the user IDs for the users on the system once you've set everything up. And also a delete button here, which will then delete the user from the system. So anybody that leaves the practice, if you use the delete button, it will then remove that user from any groups that you've got them set up in. So we're going to have a look at editing users next. Oh, sorry, just down at the bottom of that table, you can also change the number of rows that are shown on each page. So I tend to change my number of rows there to 100, which means I can just scroll up and down the list rather than having to page backwards and forwards there. So we're going to look at editing users next. You can use the blue pen next to the user's details within the table to edit the user within the table there. Clicking on the blue pen will then make everything along that line able to be edited. So I could then update the user's name if I needed to, change the email address, I can change the extension number, or I could change the permission level there. So I've changed Barbara here to a supervisor level. Whenever you make any changes, if you click on the green tick, that will then save the changes on the system for you. Once it's saved, you'll then get a success or a failure or a warning message up at the top of the screen here. Any failure or warnings, it will tell you what the problem is. So it will show you there if it's an extension number that's already been used, and then you can just reallocate a different extension number for that particular user. When you're adding users, you just need to click on the Add New User button at the top of the user list. That will then bring up a pop-up for you, which will have the entries then for the entries as they go into the table. So you've got the user's name, their email address. You don't need to allocate a short dial straight away. So if you're not sure how far up you've got in your extension number range, you can leave the short dial until they're in the table and then just check how far up you've got there. Within the role, you can select from that clinician role, the standard user with group management, or the supervisor role if they need access to the whole system. And with voicemail, as a default, we'd normally say off. You can always add voicemail in the background to the call flow for a user or a group, and that will change the setting automatically for you. Adding voicemail is in one of our other webinars, so you can find details of that on the webinar webpage there. Once you've entered those details, so we've entered the details here for our new user, John Smith, with his email address. He's going to be a standard user with group management, and his voicemail setting is off here. I've now got 2 save buttons. So if John's not started yet, I can click Save User. That will save him into the table with his little envelope in teal, so that I can then send out the user ID on the day that he starts. If he's already in the practice, though, I can click Save User and Notify, and that will then save him into the table and also send out the email automatically for me. So once I've clicked Save, John will then appear in the table. Now I've resorted the table by clicking on the short dial column header so that it then sorts it in reverse numerical order. That means that I can then see the extension numbers here. And I can see that our standard extension number range, we're up to 236 at the moment with Tegan. So our next extension number would be 237. So that's the number then that I would allocate for John, just by clicking on the blue pen to edit, entering the short dial of 237. And because those user short dials go with the individual users rather than with telephones, you can use whatever short dial number you want in there. Click on the green tick to make sure that you save those changes. And then once that's saved and you've had your success message at the top, you'll then have our new short dial on there for John. So anybody dialing 237 now, that will go through to John wherever he's logged in using whichever device. Now to access the groups, you can revisit the menus just up at the top of the page. Clicking on the groups menu here in the service delivery console will then, again, the first time you log in, give you an overview of how to use the groups section there. Again, scroll down to the bottom of the page, and in the footer, you'll have your Manage Groups button. So you can click on Manage Groups, and that will take you through to the groups list. So this is the list of groups that we have set up for our training practice here. We can see within the group, again, we've got the group name here. We've also got a group short dial. So internally, if I don't mind who I speak to in this team, I can use the group short dial number. That will then go through the queue and will look at who is the next person that's available and waiting to take a call, and will ring the phone of that particular person. So the default setting for call distribution is to find the user that's logged in and has been waiting for a call the longest. Those settings can be changed, and we'll have a look at that in customizing the groups at the end of the session here. So we've got our name of the group, we've got our short dial, we've also got then the members that will answer the calls within that group. Now these are all the members, regardless of whether they're logged in or whether they're currently active to take calls within the group. You've got your edit pen here, so any changes that you want to make to the group, then you can use the blue pen to edit, or you can copy group members using the grey person here. So I am going to add John into our appointments group so that our new starter, John Smith, can then answer appointments calls. So I'm going to click on the blue pen here. That will then make everything in the table able to be edited here. So we've got our appointments name we could change. I could change the short dial for the group, and I can add and remove group members here. If I click on the drop down, that will then give me a list of the users that I have on the system that aren't currently already in this group. So as you add them to the group, it will remove them from the available user list. Now you can either scroll down through the users here using the scroll bar and then select the user that you want out of the list. Or you can start to type the name into the box. So if you've got quite a lot of users on the system, if you type the name in the box, it will then reduce the user list to the users then that match that search criteria. I can then click on John's name within the list here, and that will then add him into the list of users. Again, I've got my green tick here to save my changes. If you want to delete anybody from this group, so take them out of the group for calls permanently, or until you put them back in, then you can click on the red cross just next to that user within the list, and that will then remove them from the group itself. Click on the green tick to save those changes, and just like our users, you'll get a success, failure or warning message up at the top of the screen there. Now that I've sorted out my appointments group here, and I've got all of my users that are in the group, I actually want the same people to be able to answer any calls that come in our emergency bypass number. Now, the emergency bypass groups on the default settings are on a higher priority than the rest of the groups. So any calls that come in on the emergency bypass group will push to the front of the queue that any of these people are dealing with. So that will then mean that I can have the same people in my appointments group as my emergency bypass, and all of my reception team can take those emergency bypass calls as they'll push to the front of any reception queue. Now, rather than having to work out who's missing out of that group, because there's been a couple of additions, I can actually use the copy group members, which is the group grey icon on the end of the options here. When I click on that, it will ask me which group I want then want to select the members from. So it's my appointments group that has the right people in it at the moment, or 20 members. So I want to copy the appointments group, so I can just click on appointments and then save the group. That will then put all the members that are in the appointments team into the emergency bypass team and change those members so that they're all the same as the appointments team. I'll then get a little success or failure message up at the top, and that group has then been updated. So both groups are now answered by the same people, but with our emergency bypass on a higher priority. Now you might have noticed that we've got some little red warning triangles here next to a couple of our groups. Any red warning triangle will just tell you that there's a problem, and if you hover over the warning triangle, it will then tell you what the issue is there. So hovering over this one is showing us that there's no call flow found for this short dial. So at the moment, if anybody rang 310, it wouldn't know to look for one of these 5 people and to put the call through to that person. Now within the groups, this is quite a simple thing to correct. So you can just edit the group, delete the short dial and save the change, and then you can edit the group and reinsert the same short dial. So long as it's not a duplicated number, that will then create the call flow for this particular group. So that's just editing, removing that short dial and saving that change, and then editing and popping it back in again. When you pop it back in, it will automatically create the call flow in the background, and it will give you the success or failure message. So if there are any problems, you'll see what the reason is up at the top of the page there, and then you can take the action that you need to either change that short dial number or modify it in the group. So to add a new group, you can just click on the Add Group button just at the top of the table. That again will give you a pop-up that requests you to fill in the details in the table. All you need to do though is to give the group a name. That will then give it an entry in the table, and you can then use the edit or the copy group members button to then populate the group with the short dial and the members for the group. So I'm going to give this group a name of Chest Clinic, and then I'm going to save that group. So as you can see now, it's slotted that group in as an empty group. I can now use my edit and my copy group members if it's the same people that will answer calls out of another group there. Now you can customize both the users and the groups still within the configuration console. So to navigate to the configuration console, you can either go from the single sign-on when you first sign in and go to the configuration console from there, or you can use the menu, which is the 3 lines just next to your initials, and navigate to the configuration console from there as well. Each time you go to a new console, it will open up a new tab in your browser. So you will see that you'll get extra tabs there, and you can then flick between the service delivery and the configuration console. Within the configuration console, on the left-hand side, you'll have similar menus to the ones that you have in the service delivery console. So we've got our users and our groups menus there. There's also a dashboard that will show the users and the groups as well. And you can either click on the dashboard or you can click in through the menu on the side. When I click in users, that will then give you a list of all the users that you have already set up through the service delivery console. Within the configuration console, you can search for those users. So I'll search for my user, which is Jack Harkness, and that's then brought up anything that matches Jack within the users. I can then use the edit pen on the user details to edit that relevant user's profile. Now, when you go into the user's profile on the first tab, you've got the authentication pin. So if this user has voicemail and they want to access the messages through the phone, they'll need the PIN number, and this is their PIN number for Surgery Connect voicemail. You can also change passwords as a supervisor from here. So if this user can't access their NHS email address, but needs to access the phone system, you can change the password for them, and then they'll need to change it when they first log in again. On the numbers tab in the users, you can also add in personal, mobile or home numbers. So if this user wants to forward their calls onto a personal mobile or a home number whilst they're working remotely, then they can add that onto the user. You can add that onto their user profile, and then they can access that through the user console through their initials. If we move on to the groups here, again, selecting groups from the menu will give me a search facility, or I can just click on the edit pen that's at the bottom of the relevant group there. Within the general tab, you can change the call distribution. So this is where it's looking for the person who's been waiting for the call the longest. If I click in the drop down, I could also change it to longest time since last call. Now that will ignore then any do not disturb time that person has been using. I can change it to top down. That will allow you to allocate a number for the group, for the people in each user in the group, and it will always look then from 1 down the list of numbers. The compound will give you a combination of the longest idle and top down there. You can have it ringing random users, or you can use simultaneous ring. It does get quite noisy in the office if you're using simultaneous ring, because everybody's phone is going to ring at the same time. If you're using the integration, it will also give the pop-ups on everybody's screen, and then the first person to answer the call will be allocated the call. It will then look for someone to answer the next call within the queue. So it can slow down the way that you answer calls as well, which is why our default is looking for the user that has been waiting for the call the longest there. The queue priority can also be changed. So you can change it from the normal, which is the default, either down to a lower priority, which means calls obviously will queue until other calls have been answered, or if it's an emergency number, you can change it to high, and that will then push to the front of any other queues on normal or low. On the members tab, you can change the auto step-in parameters for members of that group. So if you've got people that only answer calls when it gets really busy, you can set the system to automatically look for parameters within the queue, which will then bring your extra staff members in automatically and start delivering calls to them whilst those parameters are met. You can look at more for auto step-in on our resource management webinar, which goes through auto step-in and managing through the user console. So during this session, we've had a look at accessing the service delivery console. We've looked at going into the user list through the service delivery console and editing as well as adding new users. We've also looked at accessing the groups list through the service delivery console, editing those groups, adding groups, and customizing both the users and the groups in the service delivery console.